Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on Big Blue View Radio, part of your SB Nation family of podcasts. Please like, share, and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts across the Big Blue View Radio network. All right, today thought we would get a little bit of a different perspective on all of the craziness going on with your New York Giants. I'm joined today by the great Ryan Dunleavy of the New York Post. Ryan, thank you for a few minutes.
What's up, Ed? Every time I hear somebody say like, subscribe, and whatnot on podcasts, it makes me think my son, who's 5 years old, whenever he hears that so much watching his YouTube shows, that he'll come home with a drawing and he'll be like, "Dad, here's my drawing. Like and subscribe."
Yeah, well,
I'm like, you don't even know what that means.
No, but I have grandkids now, and my grandkids are like, "Grandpa, you're on YouTube?
Yeah,
You're on YouTube? I can't believe you even know what YouTube is."
Exactly. I was on TV for CBS the other day. My son was like, "How are you here and there at the same time?" Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's funny, but one of my granddaughters actually sort of video bombed one of my YouTubes the other day, which was kind of funny because I had her and I had her with us and she wanted something, so she just walked into the middle of my show and asked for it.
Yeah. Hey, look, if we're still doing this in a half hour, there's a chance my son comes down and bombs us. So
hey, well, in that case, we better get moving here, But hey, so I wanted to ask you, I don't want to start with the Daniel Jones stuff because that's, we've been talking about Daniel Jones and writing about Daniel Jones all week. I want to ask you, the Giants are 2-7. They're a mess at this point. I didn't see this bad of a season coming. And most people I talked to didn't see this bad of a season coming. I mean, in your mind, where did this thing go off the rails?
Well, I picked them to go 7-10 in May. And then I let the fans bully me into, "You're a pessimist. This team's better." So I bumped them up to 8-9. They're still obviously not going to get anywhere close to either of those numbers. I think they're probably going to go 2-15. Where did this thing go wrong? Well, look, a couple things. One, the offensive line was an absolute train wreck. It's as bad as I have 6 years of doing this. The offensive line was as bad as it's been in any of those years. The Solder, Omame incarnation, Spencer Pulley, and Jalapio, and you go just throw the name Jamon Brown, just throw the names. This offensive line that didn't have Andrew Thomas for 7 games and didn't get better play out of Evan Neal was as bad as any. Then you don't have Saquon Barkley for 3 games, and as soon as he comes back, you don't have Daniel Jones for 3 games. The injuries wore them down, and then quite frankly, the offense last year was about trickery and making the most, maximizing skill players' talents and really overachieving. And this year it was really about underachieving and minimizing talents. And really everything that went right last year went wrong this year. They packed no punch whatsoever, and they've been playing behind in games. And whether you're the Jets or the Giants in New York, neither team is built to come from behind, and they just can't do it.
Apparently New York can't have good quarterback play.
You know what, Ed? As scary as it was, maybe the most telling half of the season was not even the 40-0 against the Cowboys. Even though they ended up coming back to beat the Cardinals, it might have been the fact that they were down 20-0 to the Cardinals at halftime. That's probably where we all should have been like, whoa, something's seriously wrong. Even though they came back to win this game, that is not what a playoff team does. And that's probably where we should have known something was wrong. If not, then certainly by the Seattle egg laying.
Yeah. I have to tell you that I'm sitting in the press box watching the Giants and the Jets play, and I realized in the second half, it's like the best quarterback playing in this game is Zach Wilson. and that's a problem.
I don't even know if that's true, Ed. I might after this past week, things change in the fast. Yes, in that game it was probably Zach Wilson, but like going forward, I might rather have Tommy DeVito than Zach Wilson, and that says it. That says it all.
That says enough. But it's interesting because you look back on it and you realize I think the Giants started 7-2 a year ago. And I don't want to say that was done with smoke and mirrors, but maybe some of those victories weren't quite as impressive as we thought they were at the time. Like, Tennessee wasn't as good as we thought. Green Bay wasn't as good as we thought. And since then things have been more like what you might expect from a rebuilding team. So,
it's almost like if you flipped them and no one would have a problem. If you were like, oh, we expected the Giants to be terrible last year, right? Like new regime change. Nobody knows what the quarterback is. Saquon Barkley, how is he coming off a disappointing year? Like if they were 2-7 last year, we'd be like, all right, this is what you expect. Shane and Daboll getting their feet under them, but they're a victim of their own success this year because they were so far ahead of schedule last year that it was unrealistic for them to keep it up. And truth be told, they did a little of what Dave Gettleman used to do, which is get way ahead of themselves. And the plan to incrementally build probably got sped up by going to the playoffs and winning a game and thinking you're more of a contender. And John Mara saying we're back in the locker room. If all that doesn't happen, maybe you don't trade for Darren Waller. Maybe you don't give Daniel Jones 4 years and $160 million. Like they probably thought they were ahead of schedule. They probably fooled themselves. And we always say things are the law of averages, and you wonder if they are. Well, they won some games last year they probably didn't deserve to win, and they've lost some games this year. They should have beat Buffalo. They should have
beaten the Jets.
Yeah. So but then last year they probably shouldn't have beaten Baltimore, and they shouldn't have beaten Washington, the most important game of the year, on the Darnay Holmes phantom penalty that didn't get called in the end zone. They would have lost that game. So I guess the law of averages is true, is my point.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I'm actually just sitting down and trying to figure all of these things out, going back into the spring. But even the decisions that the Giants made this year that I kind of agreed with, you're right. They were sped up. They wouldn't have done some of the things they did this offseason. I remember asking Joe Shane about the whole Daniel Jones situation after he signed him. And I asked him if he thought he would be here, signing Jones to a contract. And he said, no. He said, if I'd have thought we'd be here, I would have used the franchise tag.
Yeah.
Or I would have used the 5th-year option, not the franchise tag. Yeah, they got sped up. And, Waller was an example of that too. But
turn the tables, Ed. If the Giants were the 7 seed instead of the 6 seed, or the 49ers were the 3 seed instead of the 2 seed. So if the first round matchup was Giants 49ers instead of Giants versus paper tiger Vikings, how different would the team look? Because instead of beating the Vikings, they probably get pounded into the ground by the 49ers, and the season ends with a sour taste. Maybe they don't re-sign Daniel Jones to $160. Maybe they tag him. Maybe they're like, oh wow, we lost, whatever it was, 6 of our last 9 or whatever. But that playoff win, that was look, they played well. They went on the road and won a playoff game. But we all know the Vikings were not anywhere near the caliber of the 49ers or the Eagles. So if the seeds had been a little different, they might have got more of a reality check 9 months earlier than they actually got one.
Right. I think entering the whole situation, I think Brian Daboll, I think Joe Shane, I think you, I think me, I think everybody would have expected that this past off season, instead of signing Daniel Jones to a long-term deal, they would have been, sending Daniel Jones packing and and drafting a quarterback of the future, which I think is where they're going to be next offseason.
I thought they were going to tag him. I always thought they were going to tag him. Up until 4 minutes before the story broke, I thought they were going to tag him. I just never, when I know that he asked for $48 million a year, I just never in my life thought they were going to find middle ground, and they did. I always thought he was going to get tagged and Saquon was going to get the extension. It's what I thought then. They didn't do it, and in hindsight, I think it's what they should have done now. So,
yeah, that's a good argument, because knowing where they were, I still feel like their priorities were in the right place. I mean, Joe Schoen made it obvious from the beginning that quarterback was going to be the priority over running back. And I think that's the right priority.
If you have the right quarterback.
If you have the right players, and and the question that everybody asked at the time was, did they have the right quarterback? They took a shot. They gave him I still see that as a 2-year deal more than anything else. I see that as a deal they can get out of.
I want to say a couple things. One, anybody listening to your podcast who knows me knows I'm as big a trumpeter of running backs, and in particular this one, as there is. Yes, if you have Joe Burrow and Joe Mixon, prioritize Joe Burrow, but you don't. You have Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones. You have to realize this is not a typical situation. You have a great running back and an average quarterback. And that's why, you should prioritize the quarterback if you have the right quarterback. The second thing I want to say is I don't want to hear anybody say Joe Schoen never had his guy at quarterback. No, as a grandfather and a father, you can relate here, I think. He might not have been Daniel Jones's dad, but he adopted Daniel Jones. He's Daniel Jones's stepfather. The moment that he gave him, Dave Gettleman birthed him, but he adopted Daniel Jones once he gave him the 4 years, 160. He can draft a new quarterback this offseason. That's fine. But don't say he didn't get a chance to have his guy. He made Daniel Jones his guy when he gave him that contract. And yes, it's a 2-year contract, but people keep saying out. And I know you know this, Ed, but let's explain it for your audience. People keep saying there's an out in the third year. There is, with a $22.2 million dead cap hit in year 3, which is the highest the Giants will have ever paid, exceeding the Odell Beckham dead cap. So it's not like, okay, he's out the door, our hands are free of him. No, you're still paying him $22 million not to be on the team in year 3.
Right. And if you're drafting a quarterback in the 2024 draft, whether they do that in the top 5, whether they take those 2 second-round picks and trade up and draft a guy late in the first round, you're basically, and I understand your point, because what you're doing is you're paying Daniel Jones close to $70 million over those 2 years, or at least your cap for Jones is basically $70 million over those 2 years when you're telling him that you don't want him anymore.
Correct. To be your backup quarterback and then not be on the team.
So it's still a difficult situation either way. In talking about Saquon, I think you and I are probably on the same page on this one. I still think that I'm very surprised, knowing how close they were. I'm very surprised that this didn't end up in a 3-year 36 or 3-year $39 million deal with the first 2 years guaranteed and be done with it. And because now they're in a situation where, considering that he's still their best player, he's still their offense, they haven't moved the needle at all in a year. He's got another year of mileage on his tires. He's got, 250 or 300 more touches by the end of the year. He's got another leg injury. And now they probably have to give him that 3-year, $39 million deal. Or I wouldn't be surprised if they do, just because I'm not sure, they can't let the guy go.
So here's where I thought all along that they would find a win-win scenario. They didn't. I thought, well, the Giants won. They got him on the franchise tag. It's a loss for Saquon. And as the season has played out, it's somehow become a loss, where now even the Giants have lost not having him under a long-term deal, because you're right. Like, he's still their best player. And Schoen and Daboll, assuming they get to keep their jobs at 2-15, which we think they will, but John Mara has fired the last 3 coaches after 2 years, and embarrassed John Mara pulls the trigger fast. So assuming they get to stay, they're going to be on the hot seat in year 3. They're going to let their best player go. I mean, I can't see that. Their best way to win games involves Saquon Barkley. So, yeah, if I think, to use your numbers, 336 or 339, I think would have got it done. The problem was it was 333-ish, and it was, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, I believe it was about 22 million-ish guaranteed, 22 million-ish guaranteed, with some per game bonuses tied up in there. They ended up $1 to $2 million apart in average annual salary and in guaranteed money. And it came nothing close to what Jonathan Taylor signed, 2 months later. So it was a lose-lose. And now, honestly, the most interesting storyline with the Giants the rest of this season is if Saquon allows them to run up his carry total, and if they even think it's worth it, or they shut him down, because they're almost cutting off their nose to spite their face. If they're going to bring him back next year, why add another 120 touches to his body? And then they're going to have the gumption, the gall, to go to him in January and say, hey, we're going to only offer you 3 and 24 because you really have a lot of miles. Well, I have a lot of miles because your team stinks. That's why I have a lot of miles, because you ran out Tommy DeVito for the last 8 games. So
yeah, it's one of those deals where, again, I thought the priority was right. I was really surprised that, that they didn't come to a deal, of even 3 and 36, I thought would have gotten it done, or
it would. Let me tell you for sure that it would have.
and I thought they could have justified that, because shoot, 3 and 36 is 24 million guaranteed if you give them the first 2 years guaranteed.
Been done.
And that's what, $2 million more than what they'll pay him on the franchise tag for 2 years. And
would have been done.
Absolutely. Yep. And probably, in hindsight, probably should have been done.
Yeah, no, I think it's that. And then you'd have him next year, year 2, probably with a rookie quarterback in Daniel. And then if you wanted to start fresh in year 3, cut bait in year 3, make it the second year quarter, make it Caleb Williams or Drake May's team, and go with your rotational running back, then you could.
Ryan, since you kind of brought it up, let's talk about Schoen and Daboll and the potential year 3. Now, I've written it. I'm pretty sure you've written it. Most of us who cover the team have said it. I think at this point that there's very little reason, as we sit here today, there's very little reason to think that Brian Daboll won't be back next year. The caveat, the hesitation to all of that is, I think 9 or 10 games into Joe Judge's second season, I don't think any of us would have said he's going to get fired at the end of this year either.
Absolutely. They were 11 games in, Ed. They were 4-7 and had just beaten the Eagles. They've beaten the Eagles 3 times since Donovan McNabb retired. So they were going to turn in a 4-7 after a win against the Eagles, and you were going to tell me Joe Judge was going to get fired? No, but they became an offensive embarrassment for the last 6 games of the season, playing second and third string quarterbacks. And
then Joe embarrassed them. And then Joe embarrassed them publicly with some of the things he said, and the quarterback sneaks. And
then he started, and then the locker room started to fracture. But so let me turn that on you. There's now 8 games left. The offense is very likely to become an embarrassment. You already saw some fracturing in the locker room with Xavier McKinney this week. People didn't like the Leonard Williams trade in the locker room. And then third, you're going to tell me it's impossible, Ed? You can tell me you can watch Brian Daboll on the sideline blow gaskets and then tell me he couldn't blow a gasket in a press conference like Joe Judge did? He definitely could. It could be exact deja vu. And I'll double down on you, Ed. You were covering the team. I wasn't. How about 6 years ago when 7 games in or 8 games in, they gave Ben McAdoo an actual vote of confidence. Like, he's going to be back. Like, forget what we thought. They said he was going to be back and then fired him 4 weeks later. So, and similar to Brian Daboll, he had the great first year with the playoffs. They both won, I think, 11 games if you add up regular season and playoffs. So they had very similar year ones, very similar year twos. He got a vote of confidence and still got fired before the end of the season. So what? Any speculation on Schoen and Daboll's future is not unfair because Mara and Tisch have created it with their own actions.
Right. I think they know in their hearts, maybe, or in their heads, they know that they've got to get off this 2-year treadmill.
Do you remember what John Mara said the day he hired Joe Judge?
Oh, I know. He said he's got to get off.
I got to be more
patient. Yep, I know. And then 2 years in, he found himself feeling like he had no choice but to let Judge go.
Correct.
And I feel like because Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll came in together, because they built and because they built some equity last year with an unexpected playoff berth, I think they have a better opportunity to stay. And I think right now, I think they should stay unless, as you said, unless that locker room turns on them and turns on each other.
I think you hit it on the head. I think what they have that Jerry Reese and McAdoo or Gettleman and Judge did not have is whatever the simpatico or whatever, that they are tied at the hip. So you wouldn't fire one without the other because you can't fire Schoen and force Daboll on somebody. You can't fire Daboll and then let Schoen hire another coach and then fire Schoen if he's a disaster in year 3. So like you basically just give them both a year 3 together because they credit each other so much that it's hard to know who to blame. It was not hard to know if you were doing a good job as a reporter which moves were Joe Judge's and which moves were Dave Gettleman's, and very few were them acting together. It's very hard to know what's a Joe Judge and what's a Brian Daboll and what's a Joe Schoen because it's almost like they share a brain, which was a good thing last year and has been a bad thing this year.
But that, as you said, that ties them at the hip. And the other thing that I think we both know is if they get a year 3, they probably get a year 4 because that year 3 probably includes a first-year quarterback and gives them, to me, unless year 3 is a complete, 2-15, 1-16 disaster, it gives them a little runway to say we've got to have time to develop this guy.
Yeah, I don't know if I would agree with that. I would say I can't say even with a rookie quarterback. You see what the Texans are doing with CJ Stroud and DeMeco Ryans. You see what first year quarterbacks do all the time. I'm trying to think who was last year's. You see what first year quarterbacks do all the time in this league. I would not say that they have a guaranteed second year. Like if they go 2-15 next year and then 5-12 next year, I can't say they get a year 4. Like they're gonna, even with a rookie quarterback, I think they're gonna have to be in the mix for the playoff spot next year to get a year 4. But we're getting way ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, we are, but still, it's an interesting, the Daboll Schoen debate is interesting. I do think they have some equity, and I do think that unless
they'll have burned up all that equity by the end of the season.
Oh, certainly.
They'll be at square zero.
I can buy that, but it's it's a situation where at some point you've got to give someone an opportunity to have more than 2 years. And I think I think the fact that they're tied together, as we've talked about, makes sense to give these guys another year.
No, I do too. I wrote the other day for the post. I said that they should get a year 3, but mostly they should get a year 3, not based on what they've done, but based on what the Maras and Tishes have done that haven't worked. It's time to just try the opposite. And that's stability.
Absolutely. Yeah,
The opposite of
absolutely.
what they've done is stability.
Yeah, and that's been that's been going on for far too long. Ever since it's water under the bridge. It's going way back, but I remember sitting in the Tom Coughlin goodbye press conference, listening to John Mara sit there and say, "Well, Tom is moving on, but this is not Tom's fault. This is Jerry's fault, but Jerry gets to stay." And
Yeah.
and at that point, I'm like, what is going on here? When you're saying it's not the coach's fault, it's the GM's fault, but the coach has to go and the GM gets to stay.
Yeah.
And it's like this organization has gone off the rails here somewhere.
It lost its way. Yeah.
And hopefully, they're with Schoen and Daboll, hopefully they can find their way back to wherever, back to respectability, and instead of an accidental playoff season every 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, we were talking a little bit offline. You and I started chatting about you coming on the show shortly before the trade deadline. And that didn't happen. But looking back at the trade deadline, the only thing that the Giants did was trade Leonard Williams. The fake Wes Steinberg account tries to tell us that they tried to trade Adoree Jackson, but couldn't get the paperwork in.
Wes is one of a kind. Wes is
yeah, I don't know, but I thought maybe moving Leonard Williams made a lot of sense. But I thought maybe they would do a little bit more than that. What are your thoughts on the trade deadline?
I thought they would do more than that for sure. I think that they didn't do that more than that actually tells you that there probably wasn't more to do. Like no one probably wanted Adoree Jackson's contract for his play this year. He was good. He was a average-ish number 1 corner, well above average number 2 cornerback last year pre-injury. He has not played well this season.
No, he has not.
He
had an injury at the time too.
Yeah, it would have been about $6 million to pick up. I think tells you nobody was really interested. Xavier McKinney, I think they're kind of still waffling on whether he's part of the future, what kind of offer to make him. Are they even going to become close to what he thinks he's worth? I think who else would have been a candidate to be moved? Paris Campbell. I think like people thought he might be able to get like the McCole Hardman or who's the other guy who got traded? Van Jefferson late round pick swap where you do like him and a 7 for a 6. I think what it tells you that they didn't do more is really that there wasn't much interest in their guys from around the league. And I got to mention my colleague Paul Schwartz has an interesting story in the Post tomorrow talking to Leonard Williams' agent about really, I couldn't even believe this, but really the Giants would have allowed Leonard Williams to veto that trade. If he didn't want to get traded, they would have basically said, okay, we'll keep you and not taken the 2nd round pick, which is basically unheard of for a guy without a no trade clause.
I saw that. And I was flabbergasted.
Yeah, that's a good word.
That they would put that in Leonard Williams' hands. I mean, to say whether we trade you or not is up to you. I mean, I can see a team saying we have offers from Seattle and we have an offer from
it was Seattle.
We have an offer
Seattle,
from
San Francisco, Buffalo. That's what Paul reported. I think maybe Jordan might have reported Detroit too.
But if let's say it's Seattle and it's San Francisco, we have these 2 offers. you're going. Where would you
Yeah.
rather we
You've
send
heard
you?
stories like that. Yeah, you've
Right.
heard.
But for them to, because that second round pick for the franchise for the Giants
So valuable.
could have incredible value as a trade chip or
Or as a
as
good
a
player.
pick. Yeah,
Yeah.
or as a good player.
Yeah.
But it's got, if they, if they're convinced that they have to have Caleb Williams, and I'm way ahead of myself, but if they're convinced they have to, the fourth pick's not going to get Caleb Williams,
No.
but maybe the fourth pick and the 35th pick might get them in the ballpark, or at least, it might get them, the fourth and the 35th pick is at least a good chunk of the way there.
Yep.
And they can stay, well, we're still in the second round.
Yep.
We still have a pick in the second round. So, but yeah, so that's incredibly valuable. But for them to say, well, it's up to you whether you go or not, I'm not sure that's good business, to be honest with you, from the Giants'
It's not
perspective.
good short-term business, but I guess it is good long-term business. I mean, if you think you're going to be here a long time, like it certainly buys you equity with agents. As Leonard Williams, a veteran player, tells that story to people, it makes the Giants front office, oh, I'd like to play for people like that. They sound like they really put your best
That's a
interest.
good point.
Maybe it pays itself forward. Then again, the other option to that is if you go to trade the next guy, whoever it is, that guy's going to say, how come wait a minute, can I reject this? Like Leonard got to reject this. So you better be willing to do that to everybody if you're willing to do that for him.
Yep. Hey, last thing I want to ask you about, we kind of touched on it a little bit. Xavier McKinney. We talked about it a little bit, and we know that he had his comments a week or so, after the Raiders game, saying that he didn't think the captains were being heard. And I kind of have to read that as McKinney saying he didn't think he was being heard. But my take on the whole Xavier McKinney thing is this, and I just want to see if you agree with me or not. I think the Giants sent a loud and clear message at the beginning of the season that McKinney's future with the team is in doubt when they said we're not giving him a contract extension after giving Dexter one, after giving Jones one, after giving Andrew Thomas one. And part of that is Xavier McKinney didn't play real well last year before the whole Cabo thing. But for me, the other part of that is, and I don't have any intel on this, but it's my belief that the whole thing that happened in Cabo with Xavier McKinney last year cost him some credibility and some trust in the organization. And that this has been a prove it year for Xavier McKinney, and it's not going real well.
It's a fair theory. I don't have any intel to back that up, but I don't have any intel to refute it either. I mean, it's certainly a logical theory. I think that Xavier McKinney is very transparent, which we as media people appreciate. There's nothing. I'd rather people say no comment than stand up there and lie to my face every day. So Xavier McKinney tells you pretty much exactly how he feels on pretty much everything, and whether it's quote unquote right or not, it's his opinion. So he felt like he wasn't being heard. I think it was very clear that he was talking about Wink and the defensive assistant coaches more than he was talking about Daboll, who, when asked about it, fell back on his weekly Friday captains meetings. I don't think Xavier was referring to anything about those. I think he was talking about in-game adjustments. So yeah, he voiced his opinion. As for the rest of the stuff, as I alluded to maybe 10 minutes ago, it's going as tense as the Saquon Barkley contract negotiations got. Would not surprise me if the Xavier McKinney extensions went similarly poorly. He believes he is a star player. Like, he was asked multiple times this year if he was ready for a breakout season, and he balked every time at that question and said, I already broke out. remembering his 2021 season
Right.
where he had the 5 interceptions and basically should have been a Pro Bowler. So he feels he's already proved, that he can be an elite player. He plays every single snap this year. He's a good player. I mean, he's a good player. He hired David Moyugeta, who's like the king of defensive back contracts, like Jalen Ramsey, who's the safety on the card, Buda Baker, like just huge DB, record-setting DB contract after another. Giants fans might remember him as the agent who took Landon Collins from the Giants to Washington for what was, again, a record-setting contract for a safety. So he hired him this offseason. He's going to be looking for that kind of contract. The Giants are not going to look at him as that kind of player. Whether they can meet in the middle or not, we'll see. But, I think that this was a prove-it year. It's not going well for the defense as a whole. I don't think McKinney's having a bad year, but I don't think he's having a Pro Bowl year. So I think he's just having you're a good player, which is basically what he is, a good player kind of season. Whether all that played into his comments or not, I don't know. What I will say is in 5 years of doing this, he is as visibly passionate about winning as anybody else, whether his methods as a player and as a leader, whether you agree with them, they are all designed because he's done nothing but winning. He expects to win. He wants to win. Our colleague Dan Duggan at The Athletic wrote a story once. I think he flipped the table, Xavier McKinney, in the famous Joe Judge game we were just talking about, where he ranted after the Bears, where they couldn't get a first down in the game. McKinney basically called out the offense at halftime. Whether you say that's good or bad or whatever, that's all from a place of no, I think I can make the difference in us winning. So to me, I respect that. The guy wants to win so badly. He's not just going to go. He's not just along for the ride. Oh, I'm doing my part. No, I'm going to try to make a visible change. And if that means speaking out, that means speaking out. I don't know that that'll get him in a good place with coaches in the front office, but I can respect what he's trying to do. I don't think it's coming from a selfish place.
No, I just think that as you sort of intimated, I think that maybe he sees his value as one thing and the organization's going to see it, somewhat differently. And he is a good player. He does have value. And you do want to keep as many of these guys that you drafted, even though Joe Shane didn't draft him. He is a guy that the organization drafted. You need to keep those guys if you can. I just wonder if the Giants and McKinney's people are going to be able to meet, somewhere in the middle.
And Shane's already paid a lot of what you would call non-premium positions. He paid middle linebacker Bobby Okereke. He, we think, is going to have to pay Saquon Barkley some reasonable number at running back. He's paying a lot for a tight end. Those are 3 positions not a lot of teams pay. Is he also going to pay a safety, another position a lot of teams don't pay? I don't know. That might be where he looks to cut corners.
I think he did that last offseason when he let Julian Love go. So maybe that's a tell as to how he wants to build the roster, but we'll have to see.
Yeah.
Anyway, Ryan, I appreciate the time. Thank you as always for dropping some knowledge on us, and we'll have to do this again maybe when we get into the off season. Off seasons are never fun. There's never anything to talk about in the off season.
Yeah, off seasons are always off seasons are made for stories that include a lot of could, likely, maybe, what if, all those kind of things.
Before I let you go, I know you've been sick for the last few days. You haven't you've been housebound. Quick story from the press room today. Tom Rock was in the room. Tom, who's a columnist for Newsday, covers the Jets and the Giants, and he reminded people today, as we were talking about the Senior Bowl, that the Giants are in a really good position to wind up with a coaching staff at the Senior Bowl
You're right.
And people were like, "Oh, that means we all have to go to Mobile."
I
So,
had not thought of that. Yeah.
yeah, well, that was an interesting topic today. It's like, oh, we might as well get our plane tickets to Mobile.
Wow, I had not thought of that. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anyway, thank you much for the time. Giants fans, thank you for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.